We have everyone here, so we will get started with another Ask the Pros session for today. The air quotes were not for pros. I know that applies to all of you. So we have Howard Deneroff, Lydia Craver, and Pete Thamel with us. I'm going to have them because what they do is, normally this is usually people in the same sort of vertical. They all do different things, so I'm going to have them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their roles, and then we can just open it up for questions. Does that sound good? Cool. All right.
Okay. Howard Deneroff, executive producer for Westwood One Sports. I'm in charge of all the hiring of talent, in charge of the production for all of our play-by-play broadcasts, NFL, college football, college basketball, NHL, Olympics. We've done around horse racing, did baseball back in the day. Basically everything but the NBA and horse and auto racing along the way. And been doing that since I got out of college in 1989. Wasn't the executive producer back then, but have been working on the national play-by-play broadcasts in both English and Spanish, which we also do some of them for all those years. And this is my third time here at this NSMA Awards, so if you have any questions behind the scenes or talent-wise, I'm the person to ask.
Hi, I am Lydia Craver. I oversee sports for the Charlotte Observer in McClatchy Southeast. I have been in the industry for a little more than 20 years, half of it spent at ESPN in a broadcast role with college sports, half with legacy newspapers, primarily in South Florida at the Miami Herald. And Pete is next.
Thank you. My name is Pete Thamel. I'm a reporter for ESPN, and I guess my job now is sort of a collection of my previous jobs. On my way up, I've worked at the New York Times as a national colleges writer for about 10 years. I worked at Sports Illustrated after that. I worked at Yahoo, and now I do a little bit of everything from podcasting to tweeting, probably too much tweeting, and breaking news and a little bit of television for College Game Day.
We'll get right to questions. Anybody have? All right, I'm passing the microphone around, so I will be the roamer.
Yeah, so question for Pete. Obviously, you write about college football, and you have to be in touch with a lot of programs and a lot of content, a lot of teams. How do you keep track of everything and what's going on and kind of stay in touch every weekend?
It's a great question. If you have any recommendations, I'd be happy to take them. It's just kind of like this wide swath of the world, and I've always found like I'm not going to be the guy who like texts every coach he knows like good luck Saturday, on Friday or something like that. So you try to have organic ways to stay in touch with people, so you're just not reaching out to them when you need something, if that makes sense. And there's a balance between like being annoying and then being in touch and then not being in touch, and you sort of have to find and it varies by the relationship, but you sort of have to find the right balance of how much you want to check in, so when things are happening at a place, you have open lines of communication with those places. But it's very case to case. Like I wish there was a magic app that was like, text these 10 people today. You haven't talked to them in 3 months, And there are actually apps and I've like tried them, but they don't quite work as well as just sort of like things are happening, things are in the news. There's just like every day I do try to sit down and just like think about, okay, what on a Monday, what are going to be the big stories on Saturday? Who am I going to need to kind of start dialogue with where if a quarterback's going to play or is going to be hurt or there's a suspension coming or just something that's going to be newsy and relevant. But I wish there was like a very linear way to do that, but I haven't found it yet. I hope there is.
Question for Pete as well. What's the most rewarding reporting experience story you've worked on in your career, if you can think of one or a few?
It's a good question. I think the one that comes to mind most immediately since I got to ESPN is with our features team. We chronicled a high school coach in Washington, D.C. this year named Pat Bean, who's battling ALS. And Pat's actually a friend of mine who I've known since he was in college. at Bucknell, he wanted to be a sports writer. So he had got in touch with me through his college coach, and I worked at the New York Times. So then he became a coach, and he would go to the Final Four every year. So I just kind of known him for a long time. And the diagnosis was a difficult one for me personally because he was my friend, and it's a really hard story to tell. Just because I don't know how familiar any of you are with ALS, but it is devastating, and it is undefeated, unfortunately. And so being able to, I think, tell Pat's story through Pat's journey really helped put him in the spotlight, and I think it really helped fundraise for the cause because it's a vicious disease that's very expensive. So that would come to mind as a recent story that touched my heart and was rewarding to be able to tell because it helped on a different level than normal storytelling.
This one's for Lydia and Howard both. When you have a variety of sporting events, or I'm sure Lydia as well, with pros, college, maybe some high school stuff. How do you prioritize? How do you build a week of coverage, making sure you kind of hit all of the key areas of coverage so that your readership is getting kind of what they're paying for?
I mean, it depends obviously on the staff, but I mean, in theory, you just prioritize when there's a big event, or it's what I do anyway. Like I prioritize around a big event and then build in from there. So a week is more significant for one thing than it is for another, perhaps, and make sure everybody kind of gets their day in the sun, if you will. But really depends on staffing, and you have to keep an eye on, obviously, if you care about fairness, what you've done recently for somebody and what you haven't. So a lot of factors. So we're kind of set up like a region where all the Southeast papers kind of work together. So we have people in Raleigh, we have people in Charlotte, we have people in Columbia. All those together, I haven't been there very long. All those together is probably 25. I might be wrong. I'd have to sit down and add them up. But it's a lot smaller than it used to be. There was a time many years ago, like where each of those places would have had that many people on their own. So,
as far as for us, if we had 24/7 talk, it would be different as how you structure, what percentage that you're focusing on. But the answer to that would be mostly NFL all the time, the way things have trended. But we're doing the play-by-play of the events, so unless there's a window where the sports overlap, we're not really cross-referencing too much. Like right now, we have the championship game tonight of the College World Series. We just finished the Women's College World Series, and other than when March Madness overlaps, with whether it's NCAA hockey or the NHL or something like that, or when college football and the NFL overlap, our sports are kind of all in their own windows. And sometimes, stations will have to decide which one they'd prefer to air if we have multiple things on the same day. But NFL is the most important thing we have in our portfolio. March Madness is a second thing, and all the college basketball around it, just because for no other reason, they're the biggest interest for listeners and the biggest revenue source. And that's no knock on, the Women's College World Series and the Men's College World Series, both of which have huge audiences. It's not the same. It's not the same revenue-wise. It's not the same as an audience for even a Thursday night NFL game between Tennessee and Jacksonville, as an example. That will always bring you more sponsors, more listenership, more, everything else. So, and it's good in a way that I can, like now I'm starting to focus. This is the last event we have until the NFL's preseason starts in August, so I can now sit down and focus on, all right, who are we hiring, what's our schedule for the NFL, what's our schedule for college football, and then while that's going on, I'll start looking and planning for college basketball and everything else, because that obviously starts to overlap with football.
Question primarily for Lydia, but I'd be curious if you guys have any thoughts. What do you see as the future of local sports journalism, and how can we be getting ready for that?
Good question. And I don't know. I wish I did know. I mean, I think that it depends on the market, honestly. I would say there's always, well, I don't want to say always, but it feels like there would always be interest locally in high schools. So that is something that I always say, like, make sure you invest in high schools. You can't get it as many places, obviously. You know, the people in the community, the parents care, the grandparents care, the neighbors care. Like, everybody's got a connection. Not everybody, but many people have a connection to college, to high schools. So I think hyper local is good. You know, there's a million places you can go, and we're not covering the Carolina Panthers, so don't read this into it. But there's a million places you can go and get stuff about the Carolina Panthers. I still am going to cover them, obviously, and want my people to do really well. But there's not a million places you can go and get high schools. So I think when you have, you know, stories like that that are harder to find other places, and also like more human interest locally, you know, I think it helps keep you relevant. You know, I mean, obviously local outlets don't have the same resources as like ESPN or something like that. So you have to kind of find your spot, really.
This is primarily for Lydia as an editor, but what would you say are some of the most important qualities that an early career sports writer should have looking to either get into the industry or move up the ladder a little bit?
I would say versatility. Like when I look at applications, we have a job open right now, and I have a lot of applications from people who have graduated in the past 3 years. One of the main things I look for is people who have done a lot of different things. So I like that you worked at the student paper, and you worked in the athletic department, and you did something with a podcast. And I like people who have done a lot of different things. I think it's important to be able to write first and foremost. That matters in all mediums, you know, whether you go into radio, you go into TV, whatever. If you can't write, you have a problem. So learn to write first, and then versatility, to me, you know, are the most important things.
Howard, Pete, do you guys want to chime in on important qualities for someone young and aspiring?
On the radio side, Lydia hit it, or I should say audio. We say radio in general, but it's really audio now, because my daughters they're 24 years old. They have no idea what a radio is, but they listen to plenty of audio on their phone, or Alexa, open this up, or whatever. So, and all of our broadcasts on Westwood One are, you know, streamed. They're online. They're on the College World Series app or the NFL app or whatever. So audio, really. And that kind of answers the question about the future. The future of radio is more audio disseminated in a different way. But yeah, writing is incredibly important for radio. Even though a lot of what we do is live and off the cuff, you still have to intro the broadcast, tell stories, lead into interviews, sound bites. You have to know, really, a very important trait is, and I'm sure Pete would back this up or say maybe it's the most important, is how to ask a question. I have a lot of talented announcers that do play-by-play, but don't know how to do interviews properly. And sometimes you'll hear it take them 35 seconds to ask a question, rather, and no question should take, in my opinion, more than 10 seconds, because I want to hear the answer more than I want to hear the announcer asking the question. And so it's not about showing how smart you are, it's just getting the information out of the person. So interview skills are really important. Writing is incredibly important. Versatility is also important as well, because just like newspapers, radio budgets, audio budgets have been cut, and so a lot of people, you know, we have less staff than we used to, and a lot of times talent are producing themselves, or they don't have help on broadcast that they should, and so being able to produce or engineer your own broadcast is another skill that's helpful. Being able to edit your own sound, mix your own montages, things like that. Any of those things would make you better at what you do, and also help you as an announcer on the air as well, because you now know, you know, you've worked both sides of it. I'm a better producer because I originally wanted to be on the air and started out in being an announcer. Wasn't very good, realized it early and switched, but it made me better as a producer because I know what the announcer needs to succeed. So those are important skills. I also say this, and I assume it holds true for anything, and when you're really young, if you're still in school, internships are the most important thing, because it gives you a window into what you want to do and not want to do, and you learn different aspects. So I always suggested to anybody, intern in radio, intern in television, and intern in print of some sort or some other way, because you learn a little of everything, and all those things overlap at some point.
I guess if the question is sort of early career skill set with I'm assuming like the likelihood or hope to move up, the one trait, and again, thankfully I'm not in any kind of hiring position, but the one trait that I look for in young reporters who I come across is their ability to report. And I think that the guts of great writing is great reporting. And I think because you can get in touch with people so easily now, the art, and I don't want to go like old man yelling at the cloud here, but like the art of talking on the phone is lost because you can just get a confirmation on text. It's just like, if you want to write a great profile of someone, if you make 10 phone calls about that person, it's going to be a lot better than if you make 5. And if you make 20, it's going to be a lot better than if you make 10. And it's simple calculus, but you just have to put in the work and resist some of the easier information sources. Like Lydia said, there are ways to extract information, but when you go about the process of extracting it all yourself via phone, you're going to find different tributaries and different things that lead you to the next thing and the next thing. So I would just say report, and that ultimately is going to push you past and separate you. It's a clear way you can separate yourself from the competition. You can separate yourself in the clip packets that you're sending Lydia. So, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and just keep making calls.
Howard, I think you read my mind on partially of the audio question, because as a radio programmer, as an affiliate of Westwood One, the Alexa skill drives me crazy because I can go listen to a full game during NCAA. At the same time, I'm pushing to everyone, hey, listen to our round-robin coverage. How does radio stay relevant, especially with the amazing things that the Westwood One is doing as a company with all of the audio programming? Yeah,
that's a tough one. For those who don't understand what the question was, so when we do March Madness, there are 4 games going on simultaneously, just like and on television, you can watch them on 4 different television networks. Well, we don't have that ability. I don't have 4 stations in, where are you based?
Huntington, West Virginia.
Okay, so but even in New York, we don't have 4 stations. So what we offer to our radio affiliates around the country, whether it's WFAN in New York or KNBR in San Francisco, we offer them basically a red zone channel. So I'm in the studio jumping, let's go to this game, let's go to this game, let's check this out. So I'm playing director, guessing basically what the listeners want to hear most or what the biggest story is. But if you went to North Carolina and you only care about the North Carolina game, or you went to Kentucky and you only care about the Kentucky game, you can't hear that on your regular radio, on your terrestrial radio station. On Sirius XM, there are 4 channels, so you can listen to any game you want. You can play your own director. Online, you could do the same thing. On Alexa, you could say, open Westwood One Sports. Which game do you want to hear? This is what the response will be. You say, I want to hear the Kentucky game. It'll take you right to the Kentucky game, and you only have the Kentucky game. You won't be cut away from it. So that's what he's referring to. Regular radio stations, traditional radio stations, get the mix. And if he's in West Virginia and West Virginia's playing, that audience cares more about that team, but he can't air that full game. He only is airing West Virginia there when I'm cutting to that game. It's a catch-22. There's no way to make it that I can just give you West Virginia and then somehow take you to FDU beating Purdue, which is the biggest story of last tournament. I can't take you there. And there are fans that will care about that. And so how do we do it? The best way to do it is that. Now, we do offer, and what we're going to probably offer more of is if you have a stream signal, that you can put a different broadcast on the stream than you can on the radio moving forward. We're talking about that possibly. So maybe you could put West Virginia full broadcast on your stream and the mixed version on your radio. So that's a possible solution, but it's not a perfect solution, because what happens when the West Virginia game is done on your stream? How do you get to the next one? You have to have somebody there at all times to then switch it, because I can't switch it for you. So it's a little complicated. It's great for the fans because they can pick and choose what they want. If you went, whatever your school is, you can listen to whichever game you want wherever you are through one of the medium we just talked about. But if you're stuck in a car and you're listening, you can only listen to the local station, and you don't have Sirius XM in it, or you don't have a great cell signal on your phone, it is a little tougher. There's no perfect answer, and I would tell you that, not to speak for television, but I'm sure there are some people who don't get True TV and can't watch if your team is playing on True TV either during the tournament. So it's evolving. It's better than it was when I first started doing the tournament, and you couldn't get all the other games. You could only get the one game. We would go in and we'd pick one game that we thought was the best, and if it was a blowout early, you just give score updates on the other game. And maybe eventually, as technology progressed, we were able to go do a cut-in for a game-winning shot like Tyus Edney in '95, or Valpo, the shot by Drew at the end. So you would get those moments, but you wouldn't be able to switch a lot. Now I think it's better. Is it perfect? No. I guess it's part of my job to make it as good as it can be, but we're getting there. We're getting there. It's much better than it ever was, and I'm proud of the product. It's just you can't please everybody. You can't please everybody. And Mike Francesa, for example, in New York, would kill me on the air every day. Why is Westwood One not cutting to this game? This game is a 6-point game with 4.5 to go. And I'd be like, well, I'm not cutting to that game because the next whistle, they're going to a 2-minute timeout, and then you'll be forced to listen to a commercial. If I wait till after the commercial, you'll get action fully. So let me stay with this game first. But you can't please everybody. So you can try, but I've given up on that. So.
For the record, it's a great broadcast.
Thank you. Thank you. It's by far the hardest thing we do. An Olympics is difficult. This is harder than an Olympics.
But the amazing thing is, that's just great to know that you're the one maybe flipping back.
I'm the one in the studio literally deciding where to go, which to change. I am the one person. I'm there 20 hours straight figuring out where it makes the most sense to switch because I'm the listener. I'm a fan. If I wasn't doing this professionally, I'd be sitting there, probably be in Las Vegas watching all the big screens at once, right? Because I don't have screens that big, and figuring out what I wanted to see. So what do more people care about, right? Of one losing, that's the biggest story. You need to cover it, whatever. Now, if you have two other ones, there are more fans of Kentucky, North Carolina, those schools, than some of the little schools. But what makes the tournament so special and so unique are the Oral Roberts or the FDUs or the UMBCs, even if it's not a 1 or 2 seed, a 15 seed rather, a 14 seed. And so I tend to focus more on those earlier because you're expecting the blue bloods to be around in the later rounds. So let people listen to the upsets and the unique storylines that St. Peter's that don't happen, all the time. But I know there's going to be a listener, a truck driver, a program director that's not going to be happy, and it's just one of those things. You can never, you got to be the best you can is all I can say. But thank you for the compliment anyway. I didn't put him up to that.
For Pete, a lot of times as a college football beat writer, at least what I've run into is a lot of times the access is the same for for a lot of media. You get the coach, you get 3 players after a practice or after a game. How have you found ways to, I don't want to say increase your access, but find ways to get creative with some of that storytelling as a writer to make yourself stand out?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think that's early career college football beat writing. That's a big part of it. Is you look at the matrix, you look at what's presented to you, and then you try to work your way around that. I mean, part of my answer is going to be rooted in my last answer, and that's just you have to report. You have to find different ways to access information. Sometimes it's chatty parents, sometimes it's now quarterback tutors, 7-on-7 coaches. You have to find the places on your beat that information flows through. And try that. I think NIL has really been a boon to local beat writers because it is broken down in a lot of ways the need to go through the school to access the players. There's whole other avenues through agents and companies and promotions to find and to get to players. And I really think that's been helpful for the players because it's promoting them making money, which I think is a good overdue thing and within the system. And I think it's good for the writers and the players to interact in a setting where they can be human beings, and it's not just like an awkward podium, microphone, SIDs like looking, and they know coach is kind of going to monitor what they say. You can actually like interact with them and be human and build a little bit of just rapport, and that's I think a big part of just growing relationships throughout. But in college beat writing, it starts in recruiting, right? I mean, you're getting to know these guys when they're 17, you're getting to know their families, you're getting to know their high school coaches, and every player has his own ecosystem, right? And you have to be able to learn that, navigate that ecosystem, and report through it.
Hi, this is for Lydia in the back. I'm sorry. Hi. I'm the McClatchy beat writer for the Seattle Seahawks out in Seattle and Tacoma. How does the Observer handle subscriptions and, for instance, NFL versus local high school sports and subscriptions? The way we do it is mostly high school coverage, yet they found the NFL wasn't as successful putting it behind the subscription only. And have you found numbers that say subscription only to a certain genre of your sports coverage?
Since I've been here, those decisions come from above and are just passed along to us, like we're going this way. They change it a lot because they try different models, so there's been different agendas, different months. So I don't think anybody's figured it out yet, to be honest. I mean, if you're talking about like what gets the most traffic, it changes, with the week. I mean, high schools brings in a lot of subscriptions.
Right.
News obviously always gets traffic. And then it just changes with the storylines, So it's not like, oh, it's always the Panthers or it's always Carolina or Duke or whatever. It jumps around.
Thank you.
Anybody? Nope. Up here.
Pete, you mentioned, congrats on your national award here this week. About NIL, how do you kind of look at kind of the full landscape, and then what type of angles do you feel are interesting going forward?
Yeah, it's almost like its own unwieldy beast, right? Like I could spend all day, every day, just focused on NIL, the different aspects of NIL, NIL in Congress, NIL in the NCAA, NIL and everything. So it was interesting because about a year ago was when NIL just sort of kicked in. Or was that 2 years ago? No, it was a year ago. And there was this like floodgates of stories that opened, and there was a ton of interest, and it was just all so new, right? Like, this guy's getting this much money. That's crazy. And I think some of that novelty of it is worn off. And I guess the answer to that is I don't know how much, this is just more of an opinion than a coverage thought, but I don't know how much the guy watching Penn State or Oregon State on Saturday cares that the fullback's getting or the left tackle's getting or the quarterback's getting. I think it's really interesting to us who cover the sport every day. I think it's a hugely important part of what's going on, but I wonder if at a certain point we've overestimated how much Joe fan really cares. It's just like, I like the Red Sox. I want him to spend money on the team. I don't really care. But as the reliever's making $7 million or $12 million doesn't really matter to me as much as if he's going to strike out the side in the eighth, if that makes sense. So I think that NIL has just kind of become another bucket on my beat where, you have to be in touch with collectives. You have to have an understanding. When I think it rises to newsworthiness is like the quarterback Nico from Southern California, went to Tennessee, who's all of a sudden smashing records for that. The Athletic did a great story about the Jaden Rashada, the quarterback who went to Florida, how his deal fell apart, because I thought that did a really good job illustrating just some of the fragility of the system and how that worked. So I don't get a lot of hey, you need to chase this NIL story maybe as much. And again, we have a huge college football team too. But it is definitely something that I'm constantly paying attention to because it can become a huge story at any time. But I do think in a good way we're settling into a little bit of this is the new normal now. And it's not as eye-popping to see numbers tied to guys in the portal. It's just kind of evolving, if you will. Free agency came to the NFL, and it was wow, free agency. Now it's okay, this is sort of part of the deal. And I think we're sort of amid that transition there. But yeah, I would be curious, if somebody did a poll, how much readers really wanted to know the nitty-gritty of NIL. I don't know the answer to that. I don't sense it. But and again, I don't see the traffic metrics, so I don't know who exactly who's clicking on what. But I do get the sense of people still like what they like, and there aren't a lot of NIL fans, right? There's not people covering. So it's important and it's a backbone, but I do think we're sort of in phase 2 now, if that makes sense.
I have 2 questions for Mr. Deneroff. You mentioned streaming versus kind of over the air, theoretically terrestrial. In talk radio, we do different things based on audience on stream versus over the air. From a play-by-play standpoint, is there anything different in terms of the habits of listeners in those 2 things? And the other question I have is with the explosion of gambling and everything in broadcasts, how do you guys navigate that? I mean, on an NFL broadcast, is it up to Ian and Kevin Kugler and all those guys to kind of do what they want with the line, or is it something where you guys have a policy?
Yeah, I'll take the second question first. So each sport that we do is different because each sport has different restrictions and whatever. This is my 35th season coming up working NFL games. And, the biggest taboo for the NFL for 33 of those years was, you can't talk about the line. You can't talk about the over, the under. You can't, it's not even forget it, doesn't exist. They pretended there was no such thing. And as a partner of the league, we're not going to go rogue and do that. We want to keep our contract with. So it was taboo. You never talked about it, never, whatever. You could say a team was a heavy favorite or something like that, but that was the extent of it. And now that it's opened up a little bit, we do have a little more leeway. However, as you're seeing as some of the players now are getting caught gambling and whatever, if you work with the league, you are not allowed to gamble. You are not allowed to do any of those things. So there's still a fine line of it. Fantasy sports is fine. So we have a fantasy show. We talk about fantasy on Thursday night in the pregame show before the Thursday night football game. But I don't ask Ian Eagle to do it. We hire a fantasy expert, somebody who's immersed in that and can talk more about it. But we haven't really dove into more of the gambling stuff yet. And that's partially because it's new, partially because we don't want to overstep or step out of line with it. We want to see it evolve. It's a storyline. So on the fantasy segments, we will delve a little bit into it. Again, we're not talking about point spreads yet. We're not talking about any of that stuff. But the directive from me to our talent at the moment is, play it safe. Let's not do anything because here's the thing. We're going on the air, let's say 20 minutes before kickoff. Most gamblers have already figured out what they're doing at that point, or they're just waiting to hear an injury report about who's going to play or not. So they're not tuning into our game broadcast for gambling information necessarily. When we do the fantasy segment on a Thursday, we're talking about all the games that weekend, so people might, think about who to activate or whatever. And some leagues are not for money, and some leagues are for fun or whatever, or bragging rights. So that's a little different to us. And so we don't necessarily go down that line. If we were doing a 3-hour pregame or maybe even a Super Bowl where we're on for 5 hours, it might make more sense. We did not address it during this last Super Bowl, which was really the first one we could have. So I don't know if that may change along the way. I may change my mind. My bosses may change their mind. We may loosen it up a little. But right now, we're playing it closer to the vest and sticking to the game facts and the action. And again, that's not what our audience is. There's a separate network that does just gambling out of Las Vegas and talks about all the sports and stuff like that. And so that can be their area of expertise. We'll stick to the play-by-play and the description during the game. I'm sorry. And your first question about terrestrial versus streaming, you're asking if we're doing anything different on the stream versus the... It's a great question. We have a research team that figures all that out and then provides that information to our salespeople that can go to it. But I can tell you this, March Madness is, every sport has different amount of streams. Like the Women's College World Series outrates our streams on the Men's College World Series, which does on television a lot of times also. It's a much more faithful audience that are looking for it. But March Madness is our #1 streamed event, more than the NFL. Now, part of that is because the NFL, up until last season, was behind a paywall. Last season was the first year it was open for everybody to go get the national stream in addition to all the local streams and everything else. So those numbers may change. But part of that reason for the stream is going back to the question that I answered over there, is that if you went to Kansas and you want to hear the Kansas game, you can find the stream with the full broadcast where you may not find it on regular radio. So, and especially Thursday and Friday, the first 2 days of the tournament, a lot of people are working. Even, especially before the pandemic when everyone was in an office, that you couldn't necessarily watch it on TV. That was your best way to do it. And so you can't have the game on in front of you. You put the stream on in your computer. But the habits, yes, there's different habits. I mean, our research team can tell you that the habits of streaming people are more likely to go to a movie or drink a soda versus a coffee or so. They have all these granular research things. So you can go to advertisers and say, hey, look, 76% of our listeners drink coffee. Great. Whatever it is. I don't know those numbers. That's not my world. I'm more on the production side. But there are differences, yes. I mean, the streaming audience is generally a little younger than terrestrial radio to start. And Alexa audience is same kind of thing. It's different. But the breakdown of men versus women and all that are fairly similar of who's tuning into a stream, the percentage-wise than that. But I don't know if that answers it, but as close as I can do.
A question for Pete. So I'm a student at UNC Charlotte, and for the last 2 years, I've been the sports editor at the student newspaper. And if you know which you are, you're the college football guru. You know there's been a lot of change within our football program, from coach firings to hirings, conference realignment, stadium expansion plans. So what advice do you have when it comes to breaking news? Because you seem to do that a lot. But with our student paper, a lot of the time we're kind of on the back foot, even though we deal with our SIDs, and they're great and they give us information or heads up. A lot of the time we're not the first people on their press list. But I know in kind of mine, I go on Twitter to make sure, and if I see that you've tweeted something, I know that it's true, and then reach out to our kind of athletic office and to the extent see if I can get a statement from them. But what advice do you have? And also, too, there's kind of been some things that have been broken, like there's apparently supposed to be an HBO documentary, but after doing some research, that wasn't really true at athletics to say that. So how do you navigate that, and also what advice do you have when it comes to breaking news and confirming your sources?
Sure. You've had a busy year at Charlotte. There's been a lot happening. A couple coaching searches. Yeah, that's good. It's good training. I would guess on a local beat level, breaking news typically comes from direct sources, right? So I think it would be incumbent on you to build the kinds of relationships with the most direct sources possible. Now, in college athletics, a lot of things go through the president. A lot of things, athletic department-wise, go through the AD. Then there's the coaches themselves, and then those coaches have their own ecosystems around them. They have chiefs of staff, and they have personal assistants. They have, all these fancy, CEO-type titles that have come in, and you have to navigate either paths directly to them or the paths directly to the people who are going to disseminate the information. And again, as a student journalist, I relied mostly on starting out on the sports information office, on the weekly teleconferences, and then, reporting is developing direct relationships, figuring out the cell phone number, starting a relationship on text, running thoughts and ideas by those folks, and building trust and credibility through them that you're going to be accurate. You're not just going to try to be first. You're going to wait. There's a whole push-pull that comes with all that. So as you get older now, and are you an upperclassman? Graduate student. Okay. So as you kind of get to know the folks and they get to know you a little bit, it's broaching the relationships more directly would probably be the best way I would advise to get breaking news. And sometimes that's hard, sometimes that's awkward. It's like asking a girl to prom sometimes and she's not going to say no. You know what I mean? You got to, life is filled, as a reporter, is filled with unreturned text messages, no thanks, I can't help you, people hanging up. And that's just part of it, and you just can't fear that. You have to just keep pushing forward through that and understanding it's not personal, it's just sort of part of the landscape that you go through. But as you push and you start to learn information, you still have to keep accuracy as your North Star, not speed as your North Star. And that's the difficult balance, is when you get information, how to vet it, how to make sure it's true, how while doing that it doesn't slow you down still at the same time. But I just think as you're building rapport and relationships with folks, reaching out to them directly and start building it that way, and going through the reporting process that way is probably the next step to breaking some news.
This is for Lydia. As you coming on with a new staff, and how are you looking at, what you have existing, different focus, and changing maybe attitudes on staff about how things are covered?
We are moving some people around. We're lucky here. I think we have a good mix of people. We have some people who have been here for 30 years. We have some people who aren't even 30 years old. So it's a good mix. That helps because there's value in a lot of different approaches. There's value in a traditional story. There's value in a TikTok. So as long as you have a good mix of people, I think for the most part with the guys around here, I say the guys because they're literally all guys but me. With the guys around here, they're pretty receptive to ideas, which is great. I think most journalists are more so these days than maybe when I started out in the 90s, because you have found that you have to go with the flow. Like, you can't just be only this or only that. And the landscape is so evolving that if you want to stay in this, you have to evolve too. So, am I answering your question? I thought I was in the beginning. Right. Right, because it lasts longer. For sure. I mean, it's just a balance, you know. I think it's just a balance. You know, you just want to have a good variety of things. You can't have everybody doing the exact same thing, if you will, the same process.
For Pete, what were some of the challenges in moving from being a print-based reporter to a TV-based reporter, and what were some good pieces of advice you got along the way?
My wife bought me a nose hair trimmer, so that was one of the big challenges that was overcome very early. I think she was pretty eager to buy it for a few years. It appeared like within hours of me getting the job. I guess it's just a different way to think about things. I guess the 85% of my job is basically the same, and I think one of the fun challenges has been the process of storytelling through the TV medium and visual medium. And there are just simply some stories that I've encountered that are much better told through visual than through words. So, but it's just a very different way to tell them too. You have to sort of cede control to we have unbelievable storytellers at ESPN. It's a place of a lot of talented people. That may be the visual feature storytellers may be some of the best folks. In terms of college football and just breaking news type stuff, like they kind of want some news on game day. So there's been a balance of like, can you hold stuff? Will it last? Like what's going to happen? So there's a refocusing of my week towards what I'm going to say in the different hits on Saturday. So that's just been like a different rewiring, and guys like Adrian Woj and Adam Schefter and Jeff Passan have been very helpful with me to just sort of like their process of walking through how they've done it, and just different ways to approach different stories. But yeah, it's I'm certainly not I'm not good at TV yet at this point. Like it's very hard to be really, really good, and there's sort of like the road to adequate that I feel like I'm pushing on, and it's very much that process is a reps business, right? And there's no better way to do it than you just kind of have to keep doing it and keep doing it. Early on, I'm lucky that we have a camera set up in the house. So like if news breaks, you can go on, within 4 minutes, how fast my fat fingers can work and flip some of those really, really bright lights on, and how quick I can tie a tie. You can kind of go on and do TV that way. So, but yeah, there's a learning curve. They've done a really good job of every couple months sitting down with me and saying, this was good, this was not good. This, I have a really bad like resting bitch face when I come on. Like I'm like a bad fake smiler, they've told me. So hope I can say that out loud. So like when I come on, like they're like, not that, but then I'm just like regular, and they're like, no, you look too mean. And so, and then you start to watch TV and you realize like the people who are really good at it, like when they go to them, they're like, wow, they just look really natural. And that's, so there's little tiny things like that are nuances that I think you're asking about that have just kind of been adjustments, and they've just really been very open and free with like coaching me and teaching me, because you need it. It's just nobody can roll in and be that natural and good at it. So.
Lydia, Howard talked about the gambling aspect and how it affects their work at Westwood One. I'm curious, especially with it specifically coming to North Carolina, the proliferation of legalized sports betting. How are you guys talking about that, aside from just covering it becoming legal?
Yeah, we actually just had a meeting about this recently. It is something on our list in terms of like project development, but we'll see. I mean, it's kind of an unknown here right now. Other places I've been, we've gone in and out of it, so I think people are afraid of it a little bit. Like they're not sure they know how to talk about it. I think there's a lot of apprehension there. So we'll see. I mean, it's definitely on our radar. We're interested. There's heightened interest in gaming, obviously, but we'll see where it's going.
One thing One thing I forgot to add on that question, so the NCAA, all our NCAA properties, we're still not allowed to talk about it. It's still taboo for the NCAA. So, and, some of the other leagues are, the NHL's getting into it and everything else. So I say my answer would be very different probably if you asked me the same question and I'm sitting here next year. So.
My question's about rejection. Obviously, how do you deal with personal rejection compared to professional? Like, for instance, I'm completely blind. I went blind 10 years ago. The first job I applied for afterwards, they wanted to hire me. And if they would have said that, we can't hire you because we found somebody more qualified, that would have been fine. It would have been professional. But in my case, I told them I was blind, and they said, I can't hire you, you're blind. So that, to me, felt more personal, more targeted, obviously. How do you do that? How do you feel about doing that with different stories, whether it be, I'm not going to talk to you because I'm having a beef with ESPN is one thing, but saying, I just don't like you as a person, Pete, or I don't talk to women for stories or whatever. How do you handle those differently?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think handling rejection and navigating around doors closing in front of you is an important part of your growth and evolution in the business. And the delineation you gave on personal and professional is compelling too, because when somebody won't talk to me, can't talk to me, isn't going to talk to me for a story, I over the years have built up enough, I think. Covering Jim Boeheim early in my career really helped me get a little bit calloused and toughen my skin a little for any type of rejection that would come forth after. Yeah, it's generations have felt those calluses, but I think that I was able to compartmentalize, through sort of some of those doors being closed early in my career, that this isn't something I'm going to take home with me. This is just part of the job, and part of the job is people hanging up. Part of the job is people saying, go buzz off. And part of the job is, just saying, all right, this doesn't have anything to do with my day-to-day. This is just something professionally. And but I can empathize with with the difficulty of separating those two.
All right. Anybody else with one last question? We've got time for one or two more.
Well, Pete, transitioning from being a local writer covering a beat, how did you make that transition to doing conference and then going national? What was that like? I know it's not an easy question, but sure.
So when after college, for the first couple of years, I covered college basketball for the Syracuse Post-Standard, and then so I kind of it was local, but it was also sort of Big East, and it was also kind of national. And then I did a year of freelance where I did some college football. When I got hired at the New York Times, I think it was in 2003. Luckily, I was so young and so dumb, I almost didn't know what I didn't know. I knew just enough from I'd been in a few different regions and been around enough where I could where I thought I probably knew what I was doing, but I really just had no clue. And the best way to transition, looking back, is you just got to show up. You got to go to these places. You got to sit with the people. It's a relationship by relationship business. And so, and then you do it for a few years, and you all of a sudden learn where who are the ADs who are kind of the nucleus of big AD groups, and then you can go that way. Who are the coaches? Who are the agents? Who are the people that are connectors, I guess, that you can build relationships with that can help, energize other relationships and things like that. But a lot of it's done through, trial and error. But, I would always go early to college football games on Fridays and try to sit down with the AD in his office, see if I could see the coach, see if I could see the coordinator, go to walkthrough, whatever it is. It's just that, the best advice you can ever give any journalist is just show up, right? If you just show up, things are going to happen. If you just show up, you're going to see people, you're going to meet people. There's a certain power into just kind of going and being there on the sidelines. In college basketball, which I did a lot earlier in my career, I would spend most of July at all those AAU events, and I would just sit in the bleachers, and you get to know coaches, you get to just talk to them in a more benign way to help build the relationships down the road. That was pretty powerful. College football is a little trickier than that. There are some satellite camps and are some things, but there's not as many maybe organic gatherings outside of the coaching convention as there are in college basketball. So it's sort of time invested, time spent in, and then when you do start a relationship, you have to follow up. You have to, do all those things that this gentleman asked me about earlier. It's like you have to stay in touch. Once you make a connection. You have to stay in touch and build that, and there's sort of an art to that. And through time, because I'd meet a coach and then I'd be like, oh man, I knew that guy when he was like 25, and now he's like the coach there, and it's like, yeah, and I never called him again. It's like, oh, well, like you make it a point to just be deliberate and be conscientious and intentional, I guess, about maintaining the relationships as much as making them.
So this is for Pete as well. I know a lot of national college football outlets, and your reporting a lot really focuses on SEC, Big Ten, and occasionally some ACC as well. How do you guys also find ways to incorporate maybe Group of Five or non-autonomy programs like the Sun Belt or other smaller, quote-unquote, FBS programs or even some FCS programs during the college football season?
Sure, and I think a lot of that comes down to like a good story is a good story, right? So we went to Boone for College Game Day this year because they had just beaten, they played UNC in a heck of a game, and then they went to College Station and won. And so the beauty of college football is you just never know where the next starburst is going to be. It's a little bit like Howard said with the NCAA tournament, like the joy is St. Peter's, the joy is Oral Roberts. And so I'm always intentional in trying to build relationships with coaches when they're in the Sun Belt and they're in Conference USA and they're in the AAC, because eventually they're going to be on those bigger stages and they know and appreciate that you've spent the time in building rapport, publicizing their teams, getting to know them on that level. But I guess when do we decide to go to Boone or whatever, like the opportunity has to strike, and those programs have to rise to a level to draw and pull in our interest. But they always make fun of me at work because I love like the small schools. I love the minutia. Like I did a story on Troy last week and everybody made fun of me at work. But it's just like I was at Mobile, so I went up to Troy and went there, and it's just I like going to places I've never been. So and I'd never been to Troy, Alabama. It's the third smallest town in the FBS behind West Point and Clemson that has an FBS program. So you just don't try to eat there after 9. You're not going to be able to find it.
That's a good one to end on. Thank you to our pros, as they are called in the title, Howard, Lydia, Pete. And thank you guys. Awesome stuff. Great questions. Appreciate you.